The Warriors and the Grizzlies just delivered another classic play-in duel in a game that featured all sorts of different tactics, adjustments, and standout performances before going down to the wire. Of course, you have arguably the smallest starting five going up against the league's biggest player, which is bound to lead to some interesting results. But what exactly did we learn from this game, and what does it tell us about the playoffs? Right off the jump ball, you could see two of Golden State's key defensive tactics. The first was, of course, the individual matchups, putting Jimmy Butler on Zach Edey, and the second was the way they had Moses Moody aggressively pressure Ja Morant. With Moody picking up the ball at half, it forces the Grizzlies to get into their offense a lot faster. Then with Jimmy on Edey, he's able to freely roam the court and do what he does best as a defensive playmaker. The other benefit of putting Jimmy on Edey is that he's now in a position to switch out to the ball against screening action, but this time the Warriors actually botch their coverage and Jaren Jackson ends up with a wide open three. Speaking of Jaren, anytime he found himself with a favorable switch or cross match, then looked to post up, the Warriors would immediately come with a double from the baseline while the low man dropped to play the dunker, and that means the only available pass is a skip to the opposite corner, which isn't a read he's comfortable making. But when the Grizzlies went back to their old faithful spread pick and roll with Ja, Moody's still aggressively pressuring the ball while Jimmy overplays the drive, then Draymond drops from the weak side to keep Edey off the glass. It was the same thing when Desmond Bane initiated. Jimmy's only worried about the ball off a screen, while Draymond and Moody are able to sink to the paint because the floor spacer on the wing is Ja, who really isn't a threat to catch and shoot. The little success Memphis did find in the first quarter came in early offense. Now there's no way to pressure the ball at half court, and the defense isn't properly loaded up, which makes it easier to get downhill and finish. As for the other side of things, the Grizzlies did something really weird with their individual matchups, putting Edey on Jimmy in hopes that he can freely roam behind the play. And as long as Jimmy's in the corner, that is the case. When the Warriors set up some three-man action up top, they're able to put two on the ball, then overplay the three on a closeout, knowing that Edey's playing free safety to take away the rim. It was a really simple adjustment for the Warriors though. They just started running their offense through Jimmy on the ball, as Edey simply isn't nearly quick enough to contain him one-on-one. The only way to stop him from getting to the rim at will is to sag way off, and he made them pay by knocking down 2 threes in the first. Another tweak they made to attack this matchup was to use Jimmy as a screener, pulling Edey into the primary action. That forces him to play up on Steph, but I actually think the Grizzlies did an incredible job of rotating behind him out of these actions, scrambling to take away any potential openings. We saw the same thing when GP2 came in for Jimmy. Now Edey's on him, so he's the one screening, and when the big man jumps out to the ball, look at how perfect Ja and Bane's rotations are on the weak side, taking away the paint, getting back out on a corner three to run a shooter off the line, and ultimately forcing a backcourt violation. Anytime the Warriors used Payton as a screener, the Grizzlies just simply overplayed Steph, then sent the closest helper to the middle of the paint. If Payton popped, nobody would even attempt the closeout, as they were more than comfortable making him beat them from three. But the Dubs have been here before, so they know how to properly space the floor for these pick and rolls. The guy Memphis wants to leave is Draymond, so they put him one pass away on the wing, while a really good shooter in Quentin Post spots up in the strong side corner, meaning that help has to come from the opposite side of the floor. Post made about 41% of his threes this season on serious volume, so he's not just a big man who can shoot, he's a legitimately high-level floor spacer. That really stood out in the non-Steph minutes. Of course, the Warriors are again looking to run through Jimmy, and the Grizzlies want to sink to the paint, but with a 7-footer who can shoot like Post, it's a lot tougher to bring help. And now feels like a pretty good time to mention that it was during these minutes when we saw that playoff Jimmy is still very much a real thing, as he ended the first quarter with 10 points and 2 assists. With that said though, these minutes to close the first were all about Golden State's defense. Now instead of Moody, it's Payton who's matched up with Ja, and he's playing him 94 feet in constant ball denial to force the offense elsewhere. Then when it gets to Jaren in the middle, he sinks to the nail and forces a jump ball. He was literally everywhere. When Ja checked out, it was Bane who he hounded all over the court, not letting him touch the ball either, and it was clear just how much the Warriors' pressure bothered the Grizzlies' offense, at one point even throwing out a full court press to force a turnover in the backcourt. Then when they were able to get it across half court cleanly, they tried running some stuff through Jaren, but with a bigger body like Post just sitting way back in the paint and absorbing contact, that's a tough shot. The Warriors ended up going on a 29-7 run, and the little success the Grizzlies did have again came in early offense against cross matches. After all of that dominance though, they still found a way to scrape together enough points in the final minute, with this tough 3 from Kennard cutting the deficit down to 6. To start the second, things picked up right where they left off. Edey was back on the court, which meant he was back to roaming into the paint, which Post immediately took advantage of with his third 3 of the game. The Grizzlies again matched Edey up with Jimmy though, and he continued to use his speed to attack the big man in space, putting constant pressure on the rim. Time and time again, they cleared out for Jimmy to isolate from an empty side of the floor, and time again, he got wherever he wanted to go. Then when Edey was cross-matched with Post, instead of running through Jimmy, they put him into some screening action where he draws multiple defenders to the paint and finds Podziemski for a high-quality 3. These minutes were defined by that Warriors defense though. Without Ja on the court, it was Bane who saw constant pressure, and off of screens they were having Post play up at the level while Jimmy sunk to the nail, then recovered to his man on the wing to take away any driving lanes. Memphis tried running that same action a few times, and even if Bane was able to sneak through Jimmy's help at the nail, the rest of the defense was rotating to perfection, with all 3 of their wings flying all over the court to protect both the paint and limit spot-up 3s. That really stood out when the Grizzlies went to a high pick and roll. Post is going to jump all the way out to trap the ball at half court, and when Edey catches it in the short roll, notice how Draymond steps to the paint while Podziemski drops to play in between the corner and the wing. That puts Edey in a tough spot as he's unable to score on Dre down low. Right after that, it was time for Steph to check in, and he stole the show with a quick little shooting flurry. The Grizzlies were doing everything they could to run him off the line, then packing the paint to not give up layups, but when a guy never stops moving, chances are he'll find the smallest window of space to get a shot off. However, when Steph checked in, so did Ja, and that Memphis offense finally found some success running through him at the point. Remember, either one of Moody or Payton was going to be picking the ball up 94 feet, which might make things uncomfortable for Ja, but because of his speed, it also makes it easier for him to get downhill. All he has to do is use his handle, and from there, he basically has a runway to the paint, where if the Warriors help, he'll find a shooter in the corner for a quality 3. So the Warriors backed up their pressure, instead picking the ball up near half court, but that's also when the Grizzlies went to a 5-out lineup, creating even more space for Ja to get into the paint and do whatever the heck you want to call this. In the event that they weren't able to get him the ball because of GP2's denial, they'd have him go set a screen to clear out space up top. And with Golden State's smaller lineup, they didn't really have a way to cover the entire paint. With that said though, I think Memphis made a fatal flaw during these minutes to close the half, and that's the fact that they started to go away from Ja a bit too much. They finally found some success and cut the deficit down to 8, only to shoot themselves in the foot and deal with the consequences of a defense that consists of Jimmy and Draymond. On the other side of things, the Warriors stuck with what was working. That meant lots of open side isolations for Jimmy against the smaller lineup, and when Edey checked in, it meant putting him into high ball screen action to get the Grizzlies into rotation. The Grizzlies continued to scramble well, but this is where the Warriors are nearly impossible to guard, as they'll continue moving, attacking and passing until the ball finds an open man. So by the time the final possession of the half arrived, they were still holding on to a 12-point lead, and when Ja tried to attack in isolation, Moody played him to literal perfection, which takes us to the end of the second. In the third, Memphis really switched up their offensive approach. They looked to attack Golden State's lack of size by running through Edey in the post, and when the Warriors came with a double from the weak side, we saw a mix of good and bad. When Edey kept his head up and made a quick decision to find the open man, good things happened for them, like this Desmond Bane triple. But you also had some plays like this where the double comes and nobody drops to Jaren. This has to be a quick pass to the corner, but Edey misses it, takes too long to make a decision, and ends up turning it over. I do think more utilization for Edey made things a lot tougher on the Warriors defense though. On a play like this where Jaren attacks from an open side and they come with a double, all Edey has to do is seal off the low man for inside position, and Jaren can just toss the ball up top where nobody else can get to it. So the Warriors actually switched up their matchups, moving Jimmy onto Jaren and Draymond onto Edey. Then if Jaren screened, Jimmy would jump out to the ball in a trap, while Draymond switched out to the perimeter to take away the pop. But that left basically nobody to pick up Edey down low, as he once again found himself with easy points. On the other side of things, I was actually shocked to see that Edey was still matched up with Jimmy, but instead of spamming isolations like they were in the first half, they got more creative. This time they go to some split action with Steph setting a back screen on Edey to free up Jimmy for some points at the rim, and when Edey checked out, Jaren was their only rim protector. He was matched up with Draymond though, so the Warriors attacked him with an inverted pick and roll, resulting in more easy points at the rim. However, when Looney came in for Dre, that put Jaren in a position to play free safety, and with him roaming behind the play, those looks weren't nearly as clean. That's also when the Grizzlies switched up their offense. They started using Jaren like a traditional 5, screening in the 2-man game. And this puts opposing bigs in a tough spot because while he's a threat to roll and finish, he's also a threat to pop out and hit the 3, although he wasn't able to knock this one down. The point stands though that he can hit that shot consistently, and defenses will treat him as such. So when a slower footed big like Looney's on him, that puts him in a position to attack off the dribble. The Warriors had to mix up their coverage, so what they did is they had Looney play the ball in a high drop, then if Jaren popped, the point of attack defender would peel switch. That then creates a mismatch, but with a playmaker like Jimmy on the floor, you'll take your chances with an offense looking to play one-on-one. Still though, the Grizzlies clearly found something in this third quarter with the 2-man game going at Kevon Looney. He simply isn't quick enough to cover both the ball and the roll, and the same applied to Quentin Post when he checked in. In order to take away the lob, he has to drop back a little bit too far, and Pippen Jr. uses that space to get to the paint for a soft touch floater. Memphis had all of the momentum as they slowly chipped away at the lead. Every time down, somebody was attacking the big and ball screen action, and after Ja hit a tough shot to cut it down to 2, he unfortunately went down with an ankle injury. They tried everything to get him right, and he walked back on the court to hit the free throw, but he couldn't stay in the game, so they quickly fouled to get him off the court. Even without Ja, the Grizzlies continued to stick to the game plan. They wanted to attack post and drop coverage, but that's a lot tougher when a guy like Draymond's on the floor because he'll close from under the basket to pick up Jaren, while Post seamlessly peel switches onto Aldama to prevent an advantage, and that's just flawless execution. When Edey returned, they went back to running through him in the post. This time a double comes, he kicks it out to Bane and creates an advantage. Then after a miss, a long rebound finds its way back to Memphis, now with the defense in a scramble, so Bane ends up with a wide open corner 3 to cut the lead down to 1. That's when the Grizzlies finally took Edey off of Jimmy, but the problem is that they don't have big wings, so instead of a speed advantage, now it's a size advantage as he still gets to the rim. That takes us to the end of the third, where the Grizzlies outscored the Warriors 36-27, cutting that deficit from 12 down to 3, now with a quarter left to play. The Warriors opened the fourth with Guy Santos on Edey, and that puts them in a position to switch those screens, but the problem is that with a wing on him, it was nearly impossible to keep him off the glass. He ended the game with 7 offensive rebounds, and second chance opportunities usually lead to good shots, like this 3 from Bane to tie the game at 94. Then, after a missed 3 from Steph, they turned defense into offense, with this layup giving them their first lead since the opening quarter. Speaking of the Grizzlies' defense, they made one huge adjustment in the fourth. Jaren's the only guy who's both big and quick enough to contain Jimmy one-on-one, so they switched the matchup. And the Warriors tried to counter with an inverted ball screen, but as long as Looney's on the court, Edey can serve as a wall in front of the basket. His defensive impact was felt on pretty much every single possession in the fourth, just using his giant frame to shut off everything in the paint, but on this one he actually committed his 5th foul of the night. Memphis challenged in hopes of keeping their biggest paint deterrent out of foul trouble, but that was unsuccessful, and guess who's ready to check back in after the break? Without Edey on the floor and Jaren guarding Draymond, once again the Dubs found themselves with a lot more space to operate, making it easier to get to the rim. Remember though, in these minutes with Jaren at the 5, the Grizzlies are looking to run pick and roll. Pay attention to the matchups. If it's Draymond defending the screener, they're just gonna switch. But if it's post defending the screener, they're looking to drop, and that's when Ja has space to attack as a scorer. So their entire offense was structured around putting post in every action. Even if it doesn't look like there's an advantage right away, he doesn't have the quickest feet and struggles to get out on Jaren's 3-ball. As a result, the Warriors got post out of the game, then the Grizzlies switched up their approach again. Now instead of a 1-5 pick and roll, they're going to use Pippen as the screener to get Steph switched onto Ja for an isolation. But with that hurt ankle, it's not as easy to just get around him, especially with Draymond parked in the lane. That prompted them to get Edey back in the game so that they could once again attack Golden State's lack of size. Without a true 5, they're forced to overhelp, and after some sharp ball movement, Aldama finds himself with an easy bucket. Like I mentioned earlier, the toughest thing for these smaller lineups is finding ways to keep Edey off the glass, and sometimes the only way to do that is to foul. That one got Draymond to 5 fouls as well, so he needs to take a break, and that means Post is back on the court, so Ja's back to attacking him in spread pick and roll, and although he gets to his spot for a clean bucket, he's visibly in a lot of pain. The advantage with Post though is that he creates a ton of space on offense, so when the Warriors go to the pick and roll between Steph and GP2, Edey simply isn't quick enough to keep up. With that said though, if GP2 is not involved in the primary action, that allows Edey to freely roam the baseline and continue shutting off the paint, as they're more than comfortable giving up that open 3. And for whatever reason, they really went away from GP2 during these minutes. Instead of involving him in action, they had him spotted up, which meant that Edey was able to single-handedly take away all of Golden State's driving lanes. By the 4-minute mark though, both teams had their starting 5s in, and Jimmy got back to doing his thing one-on-one. Against the smaller lineup, the Grizzlies once again looked to hunt for the Steph switch, but anytime Ja tried to isolate, Draymond basically played middle linebacker in an effort to prevent him from creating any clean looks. Take this play for example. Pippen comes to set a screen for Ja to get the switch, then Draymond immediately steps over from the weak side to load up on a drive. So instead of attacking, Ja resets and finds Bane up top, who attempts a deep 3 but just misses. Going back to those Jimmy isolations though, remember the Grizzlies switched Jaren onto him. Not only is that a tough matchup to beat, if he did beat him, he just ran right into Edey, who was leaving Draymond on an island and letting him take the open 3. No matter what the Warriors did to create downhill pressure, it just felt like Edey was always there, and his presence led to a complete stall for Golden State's offense during these crucial minutes. That was until they cooked up one of the best counters I've ever seen. Remember, Edey's gonna leave Draymond in that strong side corner, so what they're gonna do is start with an inverted pick and roll to get Jimmy downhill and draw the help. Then he's going to kick it to Draymond, who's immediately going to hand it off to Steph. And because Edey helped, there's nobody to jump out and contest. About a minute later, they cooked up another set. This time, Draymond's going to start up top, and they're going to bring Steph to the ball with a down screen into a handoff. Edey jumps out, but Steph loses him with a step back. Then after a couple up fakes, he finds himself with another quality look from 3, putting them up 6. The Grizzlies desperately needed a miracle, and on a sideline out of bounds play, Draymond gets a bit overzealous jumping a lane, so now he's out of the game with a 6th foul, and Bane's at the line. He hits both, but a 4-point deficit with less than a minute left is still an uphill battle. The Warriors then went right back to that inverted pick and roll action, except this time Steph falls down, Jimmy gets caught in the air, and the result is a turnover that the Grizzlies immediately turn into transition offense, where Podziemski gets called for a very questionable foul. On the replay, it looks like Pods gets all ball, but without a challenge, Pippen's headed to the line. He hits 1 of 2, so now we're looking at a 1-possession game. The Warriors can basically put it away with 1 bucket, and they decided to sink everyone to the corner for a Steph isolation. He creates a decent look that doesn't drop. Then in pursuit of an offensive rebound, Kevon Looney gets whistled for a foul, which again on the replay looks extremely questionable, but either way, it's Edey's turn to step to the line, where he hits both, making it a 1-point game. After 2 free throws from Steph, the Grizzlies found themselves down 3 with 5 seconds left and 1 chance at scoring. Then on the inbound, Bane probably gets open enough for a pass over the top, but Aldama misses him, and he actually never even gets the ball in at all, as a 5-second violation essentially seals the game. The Warriors defend their home court and advance to the first round of the playoffs with a 5-point win in a game that told us a lot. Let's start with the obvious. Steph is still ridiculously tough to guard, and playoff Jimmy is still absolutely a thing. Those two combined for 75 points, 15 rebounds, and 10 assists. I'd also like to point out Draymond's defensive genius, as he was everywhere regardless of if he was at the 4 or the 5, and I'd like to highlight the impact that both Moses Moody and GP2 had through their constant pressure. This is just a straight up elite defensive team, and anytime they're able to find minutes for post, they become an extremely dangerous offensive team as well. On the Grizzlies side, things could have turned out differently without Ja's injury, and I'm not sure if he's going to play in the next play-in game, but we still saw a lot. For starters, Desmond Bane had a masterful performance and gave the Warriors a ton of trouble both in early offense and in the 2-man game. Jaren Jackson had some moments, but I think the Warriors are one of few defenses who can really exploit his reliance on mismatches, forcing him to make tough decisions and essentially taking away his 2-point scoring. The biggest story was Edey though. As a rookie big, he came into this game and had a healthy mix of good and bad. His decision making with the ball has to be quicker in order for him to be a legitimate offensive option, but as far as the rebounding and rim protection goes, he had a pretty huge impact on this game anytime he wasn't forced to defend Steph or Jimmy 30 feet away from the basket. With all of that said though, I think my biggest takeaway from this game was Golden State's schematic versatility on both sides of the ball. Between the different ways they attacked those Memphis bigs, involved non-shooters in action to negate a lack of spacing, and the amount of different coverages and matchups they deployed on defense, we saw a little bit of everything from a team that's capable of doing a little bit of everything. And 4 days from now, the 2-seeded Rockets are gonna have to rise to the occasion. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn my post notifications on to be first on more content. If you're interested in my more in-depth research, make sure to check out the Hoop Venue podcast and my social media profiles. You can find those links in the description. Feel free to let me know down in the comments what you thought of this game. As always, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.